my name is Derek. I'm the AVP of Fastly here in Australia and New Zealand. First, I just wanted to say welcome. Thank you for coming to the events. It's really great to engage with the press. This is, I think, our first press luncheon, and we're looking forward to more of these. So thank you for spending your Monday with us. It's educational, you're doing something, and really, hopefully you walk away and we have a relationship, and you know who to talk to, and you understand a little bit more about what we're doing here in Australia. I want to thank Egan from the Campaign Monitor Group, a customer of ours, for joining us as well. Thank you for spending your Monday with us. So I thought it would be good just to give you a foundation of who Fastly is and what we do. I think I've talked to a couple of you already, and it sounds like there's a little bit of knowledge about what we do, and I think part of that is how we communicate what we do, and it can be a bit esoteric and a little bit broad. And so I'll give you the broad answer of what we do right now. So essentially, zooming out, we extend the cloud closer to end users for our customers to give more performant, more dynamic, more secure, and better, more scalable experiences. But like, what does that actually really mean? It comes down to a few products, and we'll get into those. I'll let Max actually touch upon those a little bit later, but I think it would help you maybe to understand my own journey in understanding the value of Fastly. So I joined Fastly almost 9 years ago as part of the founding sales team, and it's interesting, as a founding sales team member, you're working with all engineers, and so the ability to communicate the value proposition, they probably did a great job, just we didn't understand. And so the translation didn't really set in. So the first couple weeks, my phone calls sort of went like this, like ring ring, hello, have you heard of Fastly? No, well, we work with GitHub, we work with Etsy, and we work with The Guardian, and they work with us because our name's Fastly, we're the fastest network. And so that was how we would make all of our calls. There were 3 of us at the time. And about 2 weeks in, our Hooman Beheshti, who's our VP of technology now still, and who was then, pulled us into a room, and he sat us down. He's like, I want to show you guys something. And he plugged his laptop in, put it on the screen, and on the screen was a list of us and our competitors ranked by speed of network. And we were, I don't think we were at the very bottom, but we were darn near close to the bottom. And so for me, there was suddenly, wait, Fastly, that we were fast. Why did I join this company? It was almost like Santa Claus, like learning that Santa Claus didn't exist. Like, how am I going to sell this? But then it was like, wait a minute, Omen, why are The Guardian using us? Why is GitHub using us? Why is Etsy using us? And what we learned is actually our customers were slowed down not just by the latency of networks, but there were a number of other things that were preventing them from being as fast as possible from an operating and a application and delivery perspective. And so for The Guardian, it was not being able to purge quickly. What does that mean? Not being able to refresh content so that it was at our cache nodes quickly. So you've got a royal baby that's born. Suddenly, everybody is going to your website on The Guardian. They want to find out about this royal baby. If you don't have that content on your edge, then it goes to your core cloud or your data center, and you've got to scale up and handle that. That's hard to do. So at the time, none of our competitors could do that quickly. So that was The Guardian. With GitHub, they were looking for speed at understanding of like what was actually happening at their edge. So Fastly was able to stream those logs of what was happening at the edge in a couple seconds, where competitors at that time were a couple hours. With GitHub, well, that was GitHub. And so actually, what did that mean for GitHub? That meant they were able to detect early a DDoS attack and see it happening and mitigate it before it could actually affect them. So that was The Guardian, that was GitHub. Etsy. What was slowing Etsy down? It was the inability to programmatically push out configuration logic to their edge quickly and making it part of their infrastructure as code. So they had to log into a UI, They couldn't do everything via the API, and then when they made a change, they would have to wait hours to lots of minutes. And that just is not effective when you're trying to make infrastructure as code part of your application. So I think that was a big lesson for me, is speed isn't always latency. And so Fastly is now, we are the fastest edge cloud network in the world, so that's something we really focused on, and we are, if you were to do, if Human was to do that same ranking, we'd be very close to the top, if not at the top for most regions of the world where we have a data center. So what does fast mean today to our customers, and what's slowing them down? So I think, yeah, really the ethos of Fastly is, it's not just this idea of bringing the cloud closer to end users. That's what we do, but why do customers stick with us? Why have we been successful? Why do I still have a job 9 years later? That's debatable. I think it's because we always ask the question, what is slowing our customers down and how can we speed that up? And so what's slowing our customers down today? It's still not being able to purge content or refresh content in less than minutes or seconds. We do it in milliseconds. It's not being able to put configuration changes out in less than in seconds, which we do, where generally it takes minutes. It's being able to log, or to get your log streamed to you in near real time, so a few seconds behind live, where often you have to wait minutes. So similar to the same issues that were happening with GitHub, with the Guardian, with Etsy, still those exist today. But then we're seeing additional challenges, and we're here to talk about security. And so what's slowing our customers down now? It's trying to deploy a WAF and tune it and protect the application quickly. Typically that takes days to sometimes weeks. We see our customers do that sometimes in hours. It's being able to deploy edge compute quickly, safely, effectively. Right now, that's milliseconds with some of the other edge compute platforms out there. For us, it's microseconds. It's when reaching out to support, you need a quick answer from a technical person that understands your problem inherently. And so we employ technical frontline support and give a guaranteed 15-minute response for our enterprise customers. And so that's another way we speed up the operations of our customers. All those together is why this year with the Gartner Peer Insights customer choice for 2022 for both CDN and WAF, because I think it's not just this idea of, yes, we're creating better experiences that are more secure, but it's about removing the latency that our customers actually have to operate as a business. So that brings me to Australia. We launched here in July 2019. Yes, so please eat. And it's an important market to us. It's one we've been investing in. It's one that we've got amazing customers in. We have sales team, we have marketing, we have engineers, security operations. The team's grown pretty rapidly. And partly because we just have some really amazing customers and some amazing demand here. And I think I'm so proud when I look at the customers like Campaign Monitor that we work with, or Network 10 helping them stream the Melbourne Cup the past couple years, or Kogan helping with their Boxing Day, the thundering herd of shoppers on the Boxing Day sale that they need to deal with what some of our customers call sort of the middle finger traffic, where you suddenly have to scale up, and it's a bit of an FU if you don't. It's working with the Sydney Morning Herald and helping them deploy the COVID updates daily that we're given. So we've had some real instrumental times here with customers, and I think it's something that we're going to continue to invest in and be a part of. And I just want to say thank you for coming to this. Again, we've been here since 2019. I'm sorry it's taken us this long to talk to you. We hope that we can continue these conversations. And yeah, please enjoy your lunch.
I started at Fastly, like so many things that I have I have red glasses, I have red t-shirts, I now have a red background. So look, my name is Stephen Gillies, although everybody that I know calls me Max, including my wife. There are some really funny stories about engagement party invitations that went out that had Max on them, and had my real name, Stephen, on them, and nobody knew who Stephen was. So please call me Max. I head up sales engineering and am the technical evangelist for Fastly in Asia Pacific, which includes Japan. So I have some team members in Japan. We're currently hiring in Singapore, and I have a couple of engineers here in Sydney. I think what I wanted to communicate today was that actually, in the same way, when Derek was talking about his origin story here at Fastly, when I was looking around the market for a new startup to join just over 4 years ago, I saw this company, Fastly, that I'd never heard of. I'd heard of some of Fastly's competitors, but Fastly was an organisation that really looked like they were doing some new things. So they'd taken an old idea, content delivery networks, and had moved it sort of into more this century, right? It's this immediacy that Derek was talking about. My background has very much been security, and so I saw actually a hole in the market for a vendor to bring the same kind of changes that Fastly brought to the CDN market, those same immediacy and instant configuration changes to the security market. I talk a lot about security as code, which is essentially the ability to script your security policies and controls and deploy them time and time again in a regulated and visible way. And I saw Fastly as an organisation that was moving in that direction. So a couple of years ago, Fastly purchased Signal Sciences. Signal Sciences is a web application firewall company. They're a reasonably small company doing amazing things. As Derek was saying, they've been in the Gartner Peer Insights for a number of years, and they're addressing web application firewall and security in a slightly different way, in that a lot of it should be automated, and then you should be focusing on the things that make a difference to your application and to your environment. And so Fastly, with this immediacy of delivery, and Signal Sciences with this amazing web application firewall and security, it's a really fantastic mix. One of the things that Signal Sciences are able to do, which is a differentiator for them, is to deploy that web application firewall into multiple places in the network. So you can deploy it if you've got GCP and AWS and Azure backends, then you can deploy the web application firewall to all of those. You don't need some single choke point. But a lot of our customers with content delivery networks have that single choke point. So Signal Sciences can now be deployed to that single choke point, to that CDN environment. It can be deployed to the origin, literally onto the servers themselves. And we integrate with a number of other vendors as well. It's all about bringing security to the application and deploying it in lots of different ways. And so the thing that we're trying to communicate in this market is that you shouldn't be trapped into just one way of deploying security. And we talk a lot about security and defense in depth. You should be able to deploy those security controls in every layer of your network. And if you're going to do that, and this is the real key, the developers need to be comfortable with that security deployment. Derek spoke about API-focused companies. Fastly is an API-first focused company, and Signal Sciences are API-first as well. So all of the configuration, all of the management, all of the logging, the immediacy of making changes, and if there's an alert, the immediacy of that alert and how it integrates with other parts of your security tooling, that's really super focus, big focus for us. I could talk underwater about all the technical details. I do have a rule in many of these discussions that I have that if I start getting too into the weeds, somebody tips a glass. So just a ding, ding, ding. That's exactly that. Yeah. I don't get it often, but when I do get it, I try and elevate. I am more than happy to have a conversation with any of you individually. Thank you very much for attending, but I think what I'm really interested in discussing is some of the research that we've done with ecosystem, and there are some fascinating things in the white paper that I'm sure will be of high interest to everybody. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back to the table.
So good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be back here in Sydney, and I'd just like to thank the Fastly guys, Derek, Sian, Max, and Dave, of course, for giving me an excuse to come back to Sydney and have a chance to talk to you folks, some of whom I haven't seen for many years. So yeah, it's great to be here. So I've been working with ecosystem in this, on this project. What we've done with Fastly and David is we've really sought to get an understanding of where Australian IT security decision makers are sitting in terms of their cyber security posture. And then what we've sought to do is come up with a framework that we think can be explained easily in business terms, and gives you an idea of broadly where Australian companies are sitting in terms of maturity. So we're not using Essential 8, we've come up with something different, something that focuses more on where we think organizations are at today and what enterprises are facing. Essential 8 is perhaps more focused on government organizations. And anyway, what I'll do is I'll share with you, some of the findings of the research, and then I'll talk through the maturity model that we've developed and where we see Australian organisations now and where perhaps they could move in order to manage the risks they face more effectively. And folks, please do feel free at any point to interject. Feel free to make a comment, to ask questions. It would be great if we could make this conversational. I don't want to just be standing here for 30 minutes going through everything, so please feel free to throw in your viewpoints as I go through it. And if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, feel free to say that doesn't make sense, or ask what I mean, or interject with your view on the matter. So just some of the key talking points today. So I think, as Derek talked about extending the cloud more to the edge, what we're seeing is massively expanding attack surfaces. So we're seeing more business logic sitting on remote devices, IoT devices, more decentralized clouds, more of this going effectively to the edge, where the action is and away from traditional data centers. And what this is doing is expanding the attack surface, so giving more opportunities to attackers, just giving them much more fertile terrain, a much wider area to play their games and conduct their attacks. So in the white paper that you've got, we detail, by the way, a lot of these findings and the model, the framework that we've developed. So we've got this massively expanding attack surface that's emerged. And at the same time, we've got this very dynamic threat landscape that's got more dynamic and threatening during the pandemic, and a complex and ever-changing regulatory environment. And perhaps just to illustrate it, put a bit of color into the threat environment. So companies have had some of the worst and most devastating attacks coming from some of the well-known ransomware families. We've also seen some zero-day vulnerabilities emerge. So just to put that into plain English, vulnerabilities that nobody knew about emerged, like Log4j. I don't know, you guys have probably heard about this one, which was very, very troubling for a huge number of organizations and kept the techie folks up working throughout the Christmas break last year and the New Year break just to try to plug whatever vulnerabilities they could find. We've also had some huge third-party supply chain attacks hitting us. SolarWinds perhaps being the best known, but there's been Kaseya and others. So basically bits of software that your trusted supplier shares with you being infested with malware that is almost impossible to detect using traditional tools. So one of the other thing that we found and has become very apparent is a lot of organizations have really been scrambling to respond. They've been very reactive in their way of dealing with these cyber security threats. So each time something happens, they'll scramble to plug the gap and perhaps purchase yet another cybersecurity tool that can help them with some very specific problem they've got. And this, in and of itself, creates a big threat because often organizations simply have too many tools to manage and they're not integrated. So you have these guys sitting in the security operations centers looking at multiple dashboards and all kinds of alerts popping up, and it's almost impossible for them to address each one of those alerts properly. So there's a really big need to integrate these tools or just have a common platform, but also to use automation a lot more to detect attacks and erroneous behavior and respond accordingly. Because excluding the issue of a serious skills gap in cybersecurity and other technology areas, even if you do have people in place, it's becoming really, really tricky just to stamp. It's playing whack-a-mole basically. So you need to automate that whole process. And having these additional tools is actually making it more dangerous to some extent. What we have found is that there is a common perception that is given, and obviously, organizations will say it. So when I talk to a lot of CISOs and CIOs, especially in sensitive areas like financial services, they'll say, oh yeah, we've got everything covered. We're secure, our cybersecurity posture is mature, what can we learn from anybody else? We're on top of it, we've got it covered. When you dig down into the weeds and you talk to people a little bit further down in the hierarchy, they'll say things like, it's an absolute, I won't use the language they use, but mess in this organization. People aren't patching when they're supposed to patch. We don't know what assets we've got. It's all over the place, and it's getting worse. Okay, now why is this? And again, this is to do with the expanding attack surface. This is changing architectures. I'll step back a little bit. This is more people working remotely, multiple clouds, all this technology been brought on super fast as we digitize, and security chasing to keep up with it, right? So it's like secondary, so it's desperately trying to keep up with it. And I guess, Max touched on something very important that companies don't do this as much as they should, but they're starting to do it, and this is to start building security into code, policy into code, shifting left to as your applications are developed, security is built into that. So there are ways to address it, but again, most companies are really, whatever they say, they're not there yet. So what is interesting is, so in the survey we did, we dug around, we asked some probing questions to try to give us evidence of this poor security that we'll talk about as we go through. And the way to address this, so what is the kind of nirvana or the end state? And it really is, and it's easier said than done, but a kind of end state is to have an adaptive cybersecurity posture. So have tools and processes and people that can adapt and respond to changes in that threat and regulatory environment. Because at the moment, it's very difficult to do that. Most people are not able to do that. Use automation to help you do this. Because again, with just lots of people, it's often tricky to do this. And continuously monitor your assets and this huge expanding attack surface, rather than just having lots of different dashboards and monitoring things periodically. Just continuous monitoring is something that we believe is essential, really, to get towards what we would define as a mature state. And I know that what is mature and what is immature, so we could argue for a long time about the subjectivity of some of that. But our view when we talk to people is it's something along these lines. So more automation, having this adaptive posture, just being able to continuously monitor what is going on. Any comments, questions from anybody? Does that make sense?
With the automation and adaptation, everyone talks about AI. Automation is not AI, but how close are we to an AI system that is trying to proactively defend to a greater degree than heuristics and algorithms?
No, that's a good question. I think when we talk about adaptation, being able to adapt, I think inherent in that is that you have some machine learning and AI capabilities, built into the tools that you're using. How close are we to that? Well, there are tools out there that can do it. I would say we're still some way from that.
We want AI to
most outfits
find those 0 days and block them,
Yeah. Well, also,
that's the golden one though.
Yeah.
And the thing with AI that we see across the whole security industry is that you have to train an AI model.
Yeah.
And so in order to train an AI model of what's good, then you have to take the time to do that. You have to have enough data to do that. And that's actually where AI is still struggling.
Our AI is not smart enough yet, but it's getting there. It's getting there.
We're
But
getting
they
closer.
also need to understand context as well.
Yeah.
They also need to have threat feeds, and it needs to be able to work with lots and lots of data coming from a variety of different sources. So just again to give an idea, and these numbers don't imply a particular sequence, but of where a lot of companies are at. So up until recently, and you can say a lot of companies are still in this state, the focus has been very much on preventing all attacks and having a kind of castle and moat approach to cybersecurity. And there's inherent assumptions behind this that people predominantly access sensitive data from office environments, not having everybody remotely from multiple sorts of devices, the personal ones, the professional ones, from hotels in different countries and so forth, from their homes, from different workplaces, and so on. There's been this assumption that people will work within this protected environment, this kind of walled environment. And obviously, things have been changing. I mean, it's not just that the pandemic's accelerated the realization that, people and organizations aren't really operating like that anymore. You have way more remote employees, remote offices. We have multiple clouds provided for and looked after by different vendors that need to work together, and we need to be able to implement policy consistently across them all. We have all manner of personal devices being used. We're getting much more intimate with our contractors and our vendors in terms of how we work with them, so the relationship is more likely to be a digital one these days. So they're accessing our resources and interfacing with us digitally. Obviously mobile devices are everywhere and people are increasingly working from them. And there's this move towards, I shouldn't say move, I mean it's happening pretty fast, the digitization of the physical world, or IoT. So you've just got this kind of spread. So how on earth do you manage to get this traditional castle and moat approach to apply to this kind of blurred perimeter and this, let's say, this continual movement, this dynamism? Well, what we'd say is it's actually impossible to follow that approach. You have to take a completely different one that we will kind of touch upon as we go through. So one of the arguments we put forward in the white paper is you do actually need a fresh and new approach to cybersecurity, because a lot of people are just building on this old legacy approach to cybersecurity, with assumptions like, your identity is the person, right? It's moving right to the edge now, right? So identity is the new perimeter is a phrase that's often thrown around in our industry, but it's not where it used to be. It's not something you can define as easily. It's fluid. So we asked some questions, and let me make the best sense of the data we've got as I can for you. So we spoke to enterprises. Enterprises are organizations with more than 1,000 employees. Medium-sized organizations are ones with 500 to 999 employees. Oh, sorry, large ones are 500 to 999. And medium is 100 to 499. So we didn't go for interview the organizations with less than 100 employees. So what we commonly are defined as medium, large, and enterprise. And we asked the same question. So we said, look, what are some of the, what are the top challenges that you guys are facing from a cybersecurity perspective? And I like to zoom in a bit more into the enterprises, what some of those guys were saying, and what jumped out at me and kind of reinforced a lot of the feedback I've been getting with conversations with CISOs is, third-party risk is something that SolarWinds has made them think, geez, we're not handling that very well. So sometimes third parties have more privileges and easier access than employees within the organization. Right, so it's something that's kind of been overlooked, and cutting them off, provisioning them, deprovisioning them. I mean, again, I know this as a supplier. There's plenty of organizations I've worked for, and I've just kind of been horrified to discover that I still have access to their systems and after doing one project 6 months ago. So it's very messy. Cloud misconfigurations are a really, really big one. So a lot of the time, organizations don't really have visibility across all of the cloud assets, and what they're not doing is ensuring that their policies are applied across them all. So very often you have clouds that are set up in a way where they're exposed, internet-facing, and people who shouldn't have access to data do on those clouds. Sometimes people have just lifted and shifted, got it working in the cloud, but not really thought about the configuration, and often assumed it's something that the cloud provider will automatically take care of. When it comes to access, that's not the cloud provider's issue. I mean, it can ensure your availability, but they can't tell you who's going to have access to your resources. That's something that you need to configure and set up and ensure it is aligned with your policies. And it's a key challenge. It's coming up. So people are going, darn, look at all these clouds, and it's a massive security vulnerability for our organization.
Wouldn't the access technologies and the security of the access system be dependent on the cloud provider, whether they provide multi-factor authentication, things like that?
Yeah, but then you have to decide who in your organization.
Yes.
I think that's more the issue, is who's going to have this. So it's a case of setting the right privileges for the right people.
And managing all those different people.
And managing that, right. Yeah. So you're right, they will offer the authentication technologies, but then you have to determine the policy for who has access to what. So you may give, for example, me, right? I've had this in the past in companies where I've access to accounting software, access to supply chain software, and I've not really needed it. It's been unnecessary, right, for me to have all of that. And if I was a malicious actor, or somebody did hack and get my credentials, they could run riot.
So they're not managing access at a sufficiently granular level.
Yes, they're not. Yes. Yeah. So they're just saying, here's the MFA. You can turn on or off, and it's up to you to decide who to turn it on for and who to turn it off for, and that's one of the major access controls that they have. And that's often just overlooked. Often it's not even set.
Yeah.
So to your point, they offer the tools, but it's up to you to configure it and set it. So, and compliance, of course, is the other big one, especially in financial services, because it keeps changing. And there's also other ones that you keep realizing that you have to adhere to. So, just for example, there are certain elements of GDPR that increasingly companies are, obviously if you're international, typically you've got to be GDPR compliant. There are bits of it that are very difficult to enforce in your organization. Like some of the provisioning and deprovisioning aspects, knowing exactly where your data is at all times. They sound obvious, but they're quite difficult to be able to do. Making sure everything is correctly classified and so on, making sure that after a certain period of time you get rid of that data. Right, just having the controls in place to make sure all of those things get done is quite a challenge. And it changes, right? Even GDPR changes. Large companies talk about compliance, aligning security tools to policies and processes. So again, this is a big one. Step 1 and 2 really in cybersecurity is you get your policies and processes in place first, and then you look for the technology to make sure that those policies and processes are implemented correctly. Very often people do it the wrong way around. They buy the bit of technology and then they think, oh, does this fit in with what we're doing? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So they need to get it the right way around. And then, of course, just getting a handle on what risk you're willing to accept. And then for medium companies, technology assessment, deployment is a big one for them. Skill shortages comes up, and again, aligning security tools to policies and processes.
I'm sort of surprised that lack of qualified staff is an issue for every enterprise. Everything I've read is that there's this kind of really serious shortage of qualified security staff that affects everything.
It is. It's in if I'd shown you what it comes up for all of them. It just doesn't come up quite as high for them. So if I showed you the top overall ones, I think if I did overall, certainly lack of qualified security staff in the top 5 is a big one. But I think that it's something that these companies have been facing for years, even pre COVID. We've been facing chronic cybersecurity skill shortages for as long as I can remember. And they're amplified, they're worse. So what companies are trying to do is automate the way out of the problem, or to some extent offshore the way out of the problem, but we're seeing more automated. And automation, when properly integrated, can do way more than your staff often can do as well. So so these are some of the findings in terms of the challenges. So then we asked people to talk about risks. Again, I zoomed in a little bit to enterprises, and this aligns with, maybe I'm slightly biased because a lot of the conversations we have are with some of the larger organizations. And nation-state attacks is, perhaps not surprisingly, but this is backing it up. Very often people blithely say, yeah, nation-state attacks, big issue. But this is data showing us that it is really seen as a top risk for enterprises today. And you can see it, right? It's, I don't want to name the actors too much, but there are certain nation-state actors that are keen to get into pretty much every system and network they possibly can for a variety of different objectives and reasons. And it's a serious challenge because as a company it's very difficult to defend yourself against a sophisticated nation-state attack that's advanced and persistent and just keeps going on and on and on and on until they manage to get in. And then once they're inside they hang around and gradually build up their presence, and there's a variety of different things that they do. And I'll tell you what, it is just, again, this is anecdotal, but there's a lot of concern around insiders within organizations working together with nation-state actors to amplify effectively. Well, you've seen it. People often don't know they're spies. There was a case of a Singapore guy who was paid by some agency, I forgot, he was one of the big oil companies, to give some information. He just saw it as a kind of side job. He didn't see it as particularly sensitive information. So often you don't know that the organisation that's asking you to do something is actually aligned to a nation state. And you have the Tesla story of the guy being offered $1 million to put a bit of malware in, and you think to yourself, so for every guy who said, no, I won't take that $1 million to put that malware in, how many would say, well, yeah, I'll take that $1 million to put that malware into the organisation? So there's a lot of that going on, but there's also a lot of certainly in certain parts of Asia, there are some folks who are aligning them with certain types of political thinking, and they sometimes even view the organisation that they work with as a potential enemy, so to speak. So a lot of Western firms are really worried about their staff in parts of Southeast Asia at the moment.
Is it mainly economic or more sort of threat to state type attacks?
It depends. So if it's critical infrastructure they want to get into for what you could describe as cyber warfare. So the critical infrastructure is under siege from nation-state attacks, and pretty much certainly all over the world where we're able to get people to talk about it, right? So it's a real problem in the United States, Western Europe, here in Australia, in Southeast Asia. Just these critical infrastructure attacks.
Why
Right,
don't they just build a block from that nation state?
What's that?
Effectively block everything from that nation state.
Well, that's they might use actors outside of that, particularly they might use people outside of that nation state's territories. I mean, obviously, if you've got some advanced detection response tool that's basically looking at context and risk and so on, it'll say, well, look, if the traffic's coming from this particular place, then perhaps the risk is higher, right? And it needs more. We need to take more remedial action.
When was this survey done? Because presumably since the Ukraine and Russia war,
yes.
all this has spiked.
Yes, correct. So we did it. So it's in the last month, basically. So we did it.
So it does actually have take into account the Russian-Ukraine war.
But in other parts of the world, look, again, I don't want to sound contentious when I talk about it, but the Chinese narrative is aligned with it as well. So the two are working in concert in their long-term objectives, let's say.
Just on your question though, one of the things that we've seen some of our customers attempt to do is just block whole countries from accessing their applications. and that does have an impact on the number of attacks that happen. But unfortunately, the bad guys have got more sophisticated than just coming from a country or even coming from a particular ISP via AS number. And so what we're really seeing as the way to address some of those attacks is to look at intent.
Yeah.
And intent is more than just where are you coming from. It's what are you trying to do? What have you done recently? Looking at the behaviour of those requests, and then putting that behaviour into a yes, we think it's okay, or actually that looks a bit dodgy, or definitely not. We know that's bad. Block it at the edge.
You have to be so granular, because if you're blocking entire countries, there are good people in those countries that can no longer access those services.
Completely. I mean, I think we've all been overseas and tried to access ABC iView and gone like, why are they blocking?
Need a VPN.
But to your question, not just critical infrastructure, education, so universities are being hit. As soon as if something is said, it's serious. I mean, it's like the North Korean attack on Sony because they made a movie that offended them. There are, attacks on universities that are not complying with a certain type of messaging. Let's say.
So there's ideology
as well, and the health system. Then the financial services sector, for again, a lot of that is spying. Obviously, there's defence and government. A lot of that is spying and potential attacks. So they could try to make the financial system, mess up banks' way of operating, just to try and paralyse economies as well. I mean, there's all kinds of scary stuff that are probably not that difficult for some of these nation-state attackers to do.
And Russia attacked Ukraine in 2014, and which attacked all the UK hospitals with the NHS.
That's right.
With I think it was not Petya or something, whatever it was. These things just.
Yes. So we've seen it, and they've knocked out the grid in Ukraine as well for again 2014. But it was for a relatively short period of time. Anyway, so I won't spend too long on that particular one, but compromising API endpoints, including M2M, so a lot of this is to do with the third parties. The more distributed computing that we're seeing is more of an issue, more and more moving towards the edge, the extension of the cloud. Ddos attacks is a big one. They're often tied into ransomware attacks very closely. Cloud service provider authentication compromises is another big threat. And again, a lot of this is to do with configuration. A lot of this is to do with you not doing what you're supposed to be doing with those clouds. And then security incidents related to open source software, which is wonderful for innovation and so on open source software, but it does also expose you to more security threats. This is just talking a little bit of the numbers of tools people had. So we found out, an average of 51 security tools. So as you can see, like 47% are over 50. There are a few with an insanely large number reported of security tools that they're using simultaneously. Our take is it's difficult to say what the ideal number of tools is, but they certainly need to be talking to each other. They certainly need to be integrated. You certainly need to have one dashboard ideally, but maybe that's a pipe dream. A smaller number of dashboards than a lot of SOC security operations centers currently have. And then just moving on to some of the issues, right? So what we tried to do with this model, right? And again, we've not invented something completely out of the blue. We've worked on some of the NIST frameworks, some of the commonly used zero trust frameworks, and we've come up with something that we thought would be a useful approach. To develop a model that talks a language people will be able to understand, business language, and focuses on where we are today, which perhaps I should have highlighted this a bit earlier. Increasingly, companies are realizing that you cannot stop breaches, right? No matter how hard you try, you're going to have these zero-day vulnerabilities. You're going to have these advanced persistent threats from nation-state attacks. You're not going to be able to stop it, but what you can do is make it as difficult as possible for that attacker once they're inside your systems and networks with a bunch of different tools, right? A mix of tools. So what we did, against that kind of background is we had a few statements. We asked companies just to get the maturity. And I don't believe people are 100% honest with this stuff, right? I'll be frank with you. I think people tend to exaggerate how secure they are when you do these kind of surveys. But we tried to catch them out with a few phrases that we chucked in, like everyone has admin access. We get 5% of people saying that. Well, hey, look, if everyone has admin access, that's just, that's basic, right? So you really are super vulnerable if everybody has admin access. And then the other one, we had 29% saying employees have multiple passwords and privileges, access to multiple resources, and individual identities are fragmented, right? So you have one company with employees and lots of different passwords for lots of different resources. That is messy, right? That's not the way forward, right? That is not mature from a cybersecurity perspective. So when we looked at the people piece, the access piece, so maybe we had 4 pillars we looked at. People's one of them, devices is the other, data and network. So those 4 pillars. I'm going to talk about each one. But on this people access one, we found 34% chronically immature. Right? I mean, some claim to be way ahead. Having frictionless, risk-based access policies that eliminate passwords where possible. I'm not sure how many organisations really have that, a significant number claim to, 12%. Context-based access policies and automated provisioning and deprovisioning. Well, hey, look, 10% is probably, what you'd expect. So these are mature states to be in this category, people, okay? People / access. The fragmented identities and everyone has admin access are very immature states to be in for this particular category.
From what you're saying, it seems like the biggest challenges aren't to be highly technical about your cybersecurity. It's all about basic admin to a large extent.
I think that's a fair point.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is just understanding, setting policies that make sense around things like who has access to what and for how long and in what context, and then finding technology that can enable you to implement that. Deciding, that's on the access side. I mean, there are other things you can have again, basic admin things like knowing what devices your stakeholders are using and what for, right? So that's often something, we'll talk about that a little bit later, knowing what data is sensitive. It sounds obvious, but a lot of companies haven't classified that properly.
I think it's a case that people don't see the wood for the trees. They're so focused on all the technical nitty-gritty of protecting themselves with all these tools. They don't see some of the procedure and administrative things they could do to
That's right.
Really make things easier.
So these policy issues are assuming you're going to have a breach, right? So the reason you're funny about access is because you're assuming that if a hacker gets in and they get the credentials of someone who's got admin access to everything, they can create a lot of damage. If you tightly control that access, then when the hacker gets in, there's a limit to what they can do. But I think what people have been doing, to your point, is they've been focusing on buying technology to make their wall around their moat absolutely watertight and prevent everything, which is impossible.
I think also, Stuart, there are a number of enterprises that they might start along the path of everything's AWS or everything's Azure. But then as they progress, there are other applications, or maybe it's an economical decision that they make to utilize one of the other cloud technologies. And as soon as they do that, in many cases, the security then needs to be replicated. And they find out very, very quickly that it's very difficult to do that and very expensive.
So, this is just very raw data, this, by the way. So we didn't, quite often when I get data like this, I'll weed through it and look for some inconsistencies, because some of it looks, I think that there's an inherent bias in responses, especially in cybersecurity, to say what you've done, you're super mature. But when we talk about devices, we still found 15% that haven't classified, that are at this very immature state, right? So devices is our second category we're talking about. We're just talking about people access, now we're moving on to devices. There's 4 of them we will talk about. So devices, look, we've not classified or identified all employee devices that access our resources. So that's, 15%. So that's a significant chunk that are, absolutely not there. That's chronically immature, right? If you don't know what devices are accessing your resources. But in some of the other areas, we found that Australian companies in this particular category are perhaps relatively mature, when you compare with other countries. So a lot of them, a very significant proportion of Australian respondents say all devices are inventoried and hardened, which to me is quite surprising. It's a high proportion, but nevertheless, Australian companies could well be more mature in these areas. So automated device configuration and XDR, so that's basically detection, endpoint detection, response, expanded to clouds and IoT and so on is what that particular abbreviation means. So automated device configuration XDR use, again, that's a pretty mature state to be in, so we're seeing a lot of companies seem to be switched on to that. And we use device posture management tools, significant, right? So what's coming out here is that in this particular category, sure, there's 15% that are in this very base level. Significant number from a device perspective are relatively mature. So then when we move on to the next pillar.
Andrew, can you explain posture, what that means, posture management?
Okay, so when you talk about a posture you have, so in cybersecurity, it'll be to do with your policy. So your posture might be, okay, so we will enforce these particular policies in this particular situation. We will set our detection response to detect these particular types of anomalies, and this is the way we will respond, right? So it's basically how you implement your cybersecurity policies. But I've given you just some examples.
And how you have visibility of them.
Yeah.
That's very important to that posture.
Yeah, so you might say, all right, we want that, we don't like the device posture we have because we think those devices are giving too much access to this these types, to our IT team, let's say, to our HR managers. So we want to tighten that a little bit for one reason or another, and I'm just focusing on access here, but then you might also say, there's certain types of data we want to give a little bit more protection to, and certain types we don't, right?
I mean, it used to be the case.
And you recalibrate, because that's what the device posture management is. But
it used to be the case that you would block access to the USB because people were exfiltrating data that way.
Yeah.
And they probably still do, but in many cases it's a pain. You use software to determine what should be copied and not.
But it's a broader concept, actually. So there are these two. I mean, cloud posture management's a big one that people talk about as well, right? So, an overall cybersecurity posture is something that a term that's thrown around a lot. But broadly, it just means you can, switch it, tweak it, depending on your own internal policies and what's going on outside.
If only you could buy one of those as seen on TV braces, just get your posture.
But it's fiendishly difficult to do because it's you've got a lot of stuff.
Not if you believe the as seen on TV, guys. It's $14.95 and you get two with the price of one.
The data, I like this one, right? So we get 25%. We have not classified most of the data we use, so that is very immature for 25% of respondents here. So that makes you non-compliant to a lot of healthcare regulations, a lot of financial services regulations. You are required to classify most of the data you use, right? So that's a bad one, right? For 25% to come out and say they've not done. So this is one that brings a lot of Australian organisations down overall, as you'll see later when we aggregate everything. The fact that such a significant chunk haven't classified most of the data that they use.
Are they required to though?
They are for in a lot of financial services and privacy, for example, right? You need to say, you need to know what privacy
It's
requirements
arguable
and
that
regulations.
Protocol might not have to do it to every bit of data. I think the key there is all sensitive data, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Well then you'd have to assume that these organisations have a very small, tiny amount of sensitive data, but you're right, it's sensitive data, but still not classifying most data would suggest that you haven't even classified what is sensitive and what is not sensitive, right? You at least have to do that. So that's
a lot of work, the data is only getting more, right? So
look,
it's not reasonable to classify.
Yeah, so a lot of these guys have probably been brutally honest, right? I mean, because it's very difficult, right, to classify all of the data, even most of the data you've got. It's a huge undertaking.
What if the federal court decision of the RI advice change all of that? Like, won't that, affect all the other companies? Because now I'm guessing it's going to become legislation that cybersecurity the onus of cybersecurity will fall on the company in Australia as opposed to anybody else, I guess. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting you should say that, because there's a bit of a battle going on. There's a lot of, again, in different parts of the world, people saying, well, if the customers, the consumers are behaving like absolute, irresponsible folks, or our suppliers are, or whoever it is, why should we be held accountable for this? So that's a kind of ongoing debate. So there's all kinds of qualifiers put into some of that legislation, because more and more, but at the same time, you need to protect your consumers from, falling for some phishing trick that has them lose money in their bank account as well, right? But it's, there's more and more legislation been put on organizations to at least show that they're doing everything they can to classify and manage data, particularly sensitive data, effectively. And in some industries, you can't get away from it. So financial services, I think healthcare as well, you're in serious trouble if you don't. So that's data. So that is pillar number 3. Pillar number 4, network. Again, this is a lot of the stuff we're talking about, these controls we're talking about, assume breach, right? So you assume that you can protect from every single attack out there. So what we found here was, if they, a traditional chunk will say they have a traditional castle and moat network perimeter that protects our on-premises asset. That's the statement that they veered towards, which suggests that that's still their primary focus area. A decent chunk said they had visibility across all network assets, which, this is an area where the Australian organisations seem to be a bit more mature, the network. We've got multiple ingress, egress, in and out, micro perimeters and some micro segmentation. I was surprised that was so high. So this is basically about segmenting networks, whereas if someone gets into your network, it becomes very difficult for them to move laterally. They're stuck into one segment of the network, and you use technology to do that, just to make it hard once someone's inside. And we had a good 26% saying AI and ML are built into networks to give them self-healing capabilities, micro-segmentation or network segmentation are widely used. And this again is much higher than I would have expected from Australian organisations, but nevertheless, from what we've heard, there's a couple of areas, devices and network, where Australian organisations seem relatively mature. But then when we look at the access, people, and the data side, they fall down. Right, so that's, if we have to get specific about it, that's what the research is telling us. So based on all of that, we put this together. So what we did is, if an organization was very immature in one area, we had to say, look, sorry guys, you've not got the basics there, you get a score of 1. Right, so that is why we've got them being relatively immature, because it's such a significant proportion. I think we had 61% were very immature in at least one area. So we had an average score of 1.9 on a scale of 1 to 4 here, by the way. When we aggregated all the data, we gave scores for each of those categories that you've looked at. And then we've got each of the 4 categories here, and we've identified these kind of stages. So we think a lot of companies in Australia are still focusing on prevention alone and have got pretty weakish visibility of their assets. We think that identity is still pretty fragmented, lots and lots of passwords, the same person using multiple different resources. We think there's a lot of device proliferation out there, lots of it, expanding the attack surface. How well tracked they are is a different issue. We think there's a lot of undiscovered data out there that's vulnerable. And we think that there's a lot of, let's say, that traditional castle and moat, traditional network perimeter approach. But we think that most Australian organisations recognise that this is not the way to be and are moving towards this level here, where they're starting to realise and do their best anyway to classify the assets they've got, the data they've got, and get visibility across the network of those assets. And as you may see, those of you who work for large organisations, single sign-on MFA is now becoming pretty commonplace. Devices, well, that we're moving towards a state of inventorying and hardening all those devices and having all sensitive data classified and encrypted. Although we're not there, I think to be fair, companies recognise, they're working to get as close as possible to this state as they can. Visibility across network assets is what you talk to the Australian CISOs and cybersecurity decision makers. This is what they're trying to get to at the moment, and they've got bits of this still, which in our view means that they are still immature. Stage 3, again, we're starting to move into a kind of happy territory where not many companies have got there yet. Architecture augmented with zero trust control. So this is implementing this zero trust approach, having context-based access policies, least privilege. Right, so least privilege means that for a FOAD or for me, when we join a company, we're given the absolute least amount of access necessary. That's a policy, by the way.
Thanks.
And are the not just us, the CEO or the head of IT, right? Because often the CEO, he needs access to everything, or she needs access to everything. But your company, right? What they should be doing is, I won't name the company, but one I worked for previously, I had to engage suppliers, basically work with accounts, but I had to approve all the payments for those suppliers that I'd engaged. And I thought to myself, so I used to say that, and it was quite complex to do that, and it was a lot of work for me, and I used to say to people, I said, look, shouldn't that duty be separated? Isn't there a potential conflict of interest? I can just set my wife up, or someone I know, or pay myself. There are all kinds of things like, isn't this a bit risky? And if someone got my passwords, they could do all this stuff quite easily. And they thought I was trying to shirk work. They thought, oh, go on, just do it, shut up, do it. They thought I was trying to avoid the hassle of doing all this accounting.
It was the plot of Superman 2. It was Richard Pryor, 50.5 got 2 checks, and it's like, 2 checks, must have got a bonus.
But it was but it's a typical example of just people being given too much access. But so
You should have given yourself a pay rise. You earned it.
I think myself with that company, I probably should have set myself up as a supplier. But anyway, in the system with a kind of automated payment every month, it might have taken them several years to discover it. But anyway, so continuous monitoring and adaptation from the core to the edge is a kind of, this really is the nirvana. So where you have, as we talked about, this is what you need to have. You need to be able to adapt to this dynamic environment, and you can't do it if you're too people heavy. So it kind of addresses the skill shortage to an extent. You need automation to be able to do this. And basically you need frictionless risk-based access policies. So that means that when we go into a particular sales force, for example, it says he's not been there for like 5 months. He doesn't normally do this, and there's some kind of algorithm.
It's where the AI
it doesn't allow you to do what you're trying to do,
right?
right?
The AI should pop up.
This is where the AI pops up, yeah.
Maybe, but also maybe there should be a control in there saying that if you're coming from a location other than where you usually log in from,
then that happens with
there
Gmail.
should be another challenge.
That happens with Gmail and all sorts of things all the time.
So why is Matt doing this at 5 a.m. from Tahiti, right?
Yeah.
And maybe Tahiti is a bad example. Why is he doing it at 5 a.m. from Kazakhstan?
Not so much.
It would raise a red flag, right? So you're building in your AI, your ML to all of these different things, but just in the interest of time, let's move on to our conclusion. So the research showed us that, again, in our view, from what we've done, what I've illustrated here, cyber maturity of Australian companies is still too low. I think companies are kind of aware where they need to get to. Companies really need to kind of step back and just look at where they are and do something about it. A new automated and adaptive approach is required. So getting away from this obsession with whack-a-mole and just having this this iron curtain or wall around your assets, which is the approach a lot of companies have traditionally taken.
Mr. Milgreen, tear down this wall.
Right. And a more automated and adaptive approach is required, and these expanding attack surfaces that are going to continue expanding, and this dynamic threat and regulator is going to overwhelm well, it is, I shouldn't say it's going to, it's overwhelming with SOCs. It really is. They're really being overwhelmed, and we need to do something about, I shouldn't say we, our clients, the large enterprises in particular, and the medium-sized ones and the small ones really need to do something about this. So there you go, guys. That is these are the overall findings from the research that we've done. I know I've whizzed through it in a relatively short period of time, but does anyone have any comments or questions?
So the full report is available for us to link to in
The white paper, you've got the white paper. I mean, if you have any further questions about it, feel free to ask. So the white paper goes into more detail than I've gone into there.
Maybe one for Max. I see that Nine is a customer, and obviously they're a high-profile cybersecurity case. Could you maybe talk through any of your interactions or implications at the time, or is it all top secret, or was there no interaction?
I think I can talk a little bit to Nine, and it's an organisation. They're very aware and they're very good at visibility. And it was actually one of the things that attracted me to working with Nine to help them continue that journey of visibility. What we discovered very early on, maybe 3 years ago, was that they had a real want to automate things. And we can talk about automation. They actually wanted to script everything, because this ability to do repeatable releases is really important to them. I think it actually goes to the people as well. It's very difficult to train somebody and get them up and running very, very quickly unless you have processes in place. And so the Nine development team, they saw that putting in place an automated way to release new code or release new applications was key to what they needed to do. And one of the reasons that they chose Fastly was because we gave them the ability to do that and to purge content very quickly, so they had the very latest news up online. It's also an interesting use case in that, and I was involved in some of the very first Fairfax, if you remember them, very first websites. And there would be this struggle to get everything up and online by 6 a.m, right? So you'd have your deadlines, which all of you guys are very familiar with, and then all of that work had been done. So how do we get it online? And then it was current for another 24 hours. And you all know today that news is only current when it's released, and then almost certainly could be updated seconds later or minutes later. And so the ability to automate that and to purge things very quickly and have total control and visibility, that really was Nine's initial focus. Now, I think one of the really interesting things about them, as they move forward into the Fastly security products, they need scalability. If you have everybody going to Nine now to watch the footy, everyone's logging in at the same time, or within a 10-minute period at least. And so being able to scale to 100,000 concurrent logins was super critical for them. And I found it fascinating to work with the team that was building that scalability, because previously they would do that in spinning up lots and lots of back-end services. And that's very expensive. If you pre-purchase a whole lot of compute from an AWS or a GCP, or it doesn't really matter who, you're prepaying for an event that you think might occur. If it's a grand final, absolutely, you know it's going to happen. You know that's going to happen. But if it's one of the minor games, how do you know how many people are actually going to log in to watch it? And so Fastly gives the ability to scale, regardless of the number of people who turn up to sign in, but also maintain that security at scale. And that's really key. Hopefully not too much of a sales pitch.
Would you like to reintroduce that?
Yes. Again, there's a customer of ours who works at CM Group, Campaign Monitor Group, and is a guest of ours, and I think has a couple things to share with us.
Yes, I can definitely kind of jump on that. So yes, nice to meet you all. Agat Savard, Senior Director of Security and Risk for CM Group, or Campaign Monitor Group. You probably mostly know Campaign Monitor from the Australian company. The Campaign Monitor Group has a security team, which I lead. We're a global security team. And under the umbrella of CM Group, there are actually 8 different companies. And so while each of these companies runs independently and has their own tech stack, engineering teams, product teams, infrastructure teams, there's only one security team. And so we oversee all the security operations, security program and posture for CM Group. And the way and the reason why I'm probably sitting at the table here is because we've been a partner with Signal Science since their early days and have been using their WAF technologies across our organization. So Campaign Monitor being a MarTech company, so we're not only email sending, we're also omni-channel, so SMS, push notifications, so on and so forth. And recently, through an acquisition, we're now into the loyalty business, which makes it super interesting. But the volumes that we see are incredible. So using the Signal Science technologies, for instance, in a week, we block about 1 billion malicious requests against our organization. So that's been a significant increase and an asset in our security tool belt to really have that technology with us. Because it's just been a game changer. So it's reduced a lot of the noise that we had before. It's actually assisted our companies with reducing compute power in the back end because we're now able to block malicious requests right at the edge or much further, much higher up into the communication chain. So it doesn't hit our databases, it doesn't hit our systems. And then we're also able to provide security in the nick of a second. So we talked, it was Max who was talking about threat actors, coming from state actors. We've been on the receiving end of that. Obviously, we've been trending that thanks to the stats that we get through the Fastly WAF. We've been able to trend the increasing volumes over time from certain state nations, and have been able to say, yep, we're going to block here, and we're able to block certain locations in literally a matter of seconds across all 8 companies and reduce that noise, in a fraction of a second. So that's been really kind of an incredible tool and platform for us to use. And where it's also assisted us is with the skill shortage. So we talked about the skill shortage that's come up a lot and the need for automation. And while we're a small team, we're 13 globally, looking after 8 companies. So, we have some very competent people on the team, but there's not many of us. And so that means we've had to make the best choices in technologies so that we could be as efficient as possible. And Fastly, Advanced WAF, I don't know if I should reference it to Fastly or Signal Science now. Okay.
Fastly next generation.
Next gen? Okay.
Next gen WAF.
Okay. It's always going to be 6 iron. But that has allowed us to really implement that technology really quickly because it doesn't require for a highly technical person to operate that technology. So in the past, if you had a WAF, you had to sort of had somebody who could do regex, who had a deep understanding of the platform. Whereas now with the next gen WAF, you can just come in. It's really super easy UI that you can utilize. Very kind of, I would say, intuitive rule creations. And then so you don't have to have the most technical person really utilizing the tool. And with the increased feature that I've recently come out with, the advanced rate limiting, that has been another game changer for us because now we're increasing the value of the technology. So where the WAF has historically been a security tool, and we kept that really close to our chest, right? Nobody touches the security tool. We've actually opened it up now. I have made it available to our site reliability engineers and to our infrastructure teams because we decided to shift some of the rate limiting to the WAF. And then so rather than having that historically at the application layer, which required a new code deploy to do any sort of changes to the rate limiting parameters, now that's all on this Fastly WAF, and then so we can do that really in quite an agile fashion, and other teams amongst business or using the tool, to support that. So, I obviously have nothing.
Remind us what the WAF stands for again, Web Acceleration?
Web application firewall.
Web security. Web security, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of the journey and how we use, the Fastly technology at CM Group. I honestly, it's been such a great partnership. When Derek and the team asked me, they want to come for lunch. Absolutely, I can talk about this all day, and I get food on top of it. That's totally cool. No, I've nothing but great things to say. It's been an absolute game changer technology for us at CM Group, and it's given us the visibility and the ability to provide statistics to the higher ups as well in terms of reporting, right? To show proof of the successes that we're having with the technology and dwarfing the attacks. It's kind of been just a great all-around solution. That's my story.
Thank you.
All right.